Hey, Teacups. Welcome to the very first episode of our YouTube channel. A lot of you may know me from my blog called The Tea House, and if you don't, hi, my name is Sophie, and I'm obsessed with tea. For this very first episode, I really want to tell you guys all the different kinds of tea, how they're produced, what makes them different from each other, before we actually get into the stuff that we'll do later in the channel. So make sure you stay tuned, subscribe, like, share, all that good stuff. We'll get back to it. But for now, we're first going to talk about what the different kinds of tea are, how you make them, where they come from, and things like that. So one thing that I want to get out of the way very first is that I may have a very large collection of tea, but I certainly don't have every single kind of tea everywhere. I'm also not licensed in any way to talk about tea. I'm just obsessed with it. So if there's anything I get wrong, feel free to leave a comment, tell me what I can do better, and I would love to have your input on what you guys would love to see, what you would love to hear, and what you'd like to learn about. What I can tell you though is that there's actually 7 different types of teas, which is way more than I originally thought. The 7 kinds, there's black tea, green tea, herbal tea. There's also fermented tea, oolong tea, yellow tea, white tea. So some of my personal favorites, I really love an herbal tea, a green tea, things like that. They're usually lighter and easier to drink, more refreshing. Black tea, what we'll talk about first, is actually something that is more common in the United States than it is anywhere else, where tea originated probably in China, from what we can get from history side of things. So when people say tea in the US, they usually mean black tea. Black tea is used to make sun tea, sweet tea, and things like English breakfast and Earl Grey tea are both black teas as well. So black tea is one of the oldest teas that we know about. It comes from the Chinese and Japanese, which is where almost all teas come from. It is called black tea because of the way that it's produced. The tea leaves specifically are allowed to oxidize for much longer than any of the other teas that we're going to talk about today. And that gives it a really nice, smoky, deep flavor compared to some of the other teas that are lighter, like a green or white tea. There's 2 ways that you can process black tea to give it that smoky flavor, and both ways actually give it a little bit of a different flavor because both ways actually give it a different flavor depending on whether it's going to be sold as easy tea bags or it's going to be sold as like loose leaf, which is what I prefer to use because it gives you a really nice flavor. So one of the ways that is the most common, it's called the orthodox processing, is when you take the tea leaves, you wither them. So that means you just kind of let them sit out for a while so all the moisture comes out of it and they kind of, get all shrunken like your fingers in the bath do kind of. And then what you do next is you actually roll up the tea leaves. So there's a lot of different ways that you can roll tea leaves. There's some ways that you can do it like with your hands. You can do it in a machine and kind of put some other stuff in there and shake it around a little bit. And what that rolling process is going to do is going to bruise up the tea leaves. So when you bruise up the tea leaves, it helps get that flavor to come out a little bit more. And depending on the way that you do it, it could give it some more flavor. So hand rolling usually has more flavor than putting it into like a big vat of something and shaking it all up. After the rolling comes the oxidizing, and that's when you leave your tea leaves out individually and you let them oxidize. You let all the oxygen come out of the tea leaves and dry them kind of out in the sun. And the longer you leave something to oxidize, the deeper the flavor gets. That's why black tea is a much bolder and heavier taste than say something like a white or green tea, which has minimal oxidizing. After you oxidize, you leave it out to dry, or you put it into a hot oven to dry to really get the rest of that moisture out, where then you can package it and send it off. So that's the orthodox way of processing. The non-orthodox way is when you wither it and then you cut it up before you let it oxidize. And why you would do that is for a lot of tea bags or like fast production uses a cutting method versus leaving them whole tea leaves. Now it gets rid of some of the flavor because you don't have the whole tea leaf to actually put into your teacup or your strainer. Don't drink tea, but do drink tea. Don't drink tea leaves. It cuts up some of that flavor so you don't have it in the actual tea, but it makes it way easier to package and put into boxes instead of having some like big bags or boxes that you have to send to other stores. After you cut them up, then comes the oxidizing, which we talked about earlier. You leave it out for a really long time to get all the oxygen out. Then you put it into the oven and dry it just like you do in the orthodox processing. Both of those ways are used pretty regularly. I would say that we are more familiar with the non-orthodox way of processing because most of us drink fast produce tea, meaning tea bags. But if you're someone like me or someone who likes to have a little bit more flavor, then you can actually use a whole leaf tea, which I like to use whole tea leaves because I like the flavor, and it's much easier to put other flavors into the black tea in whole tea leaves than trying to do it with a tea bag. But also, it's your preference. If you like to use a tea bag because it's way easier, feel free. I like them. My favorite black tea is English breakfast. It's a Bigelow tea. It's absolutely delicious. So in black tea, obviously there's a lot of different kinds of tea that I'm sure that you've seen on the shelves. There's Assam tea, there's Darjeeling tea, there's Ceylon tea, and there's Kenyan tea, which are all individual subsections of the larger section of black tea. Now that might not be all of them. If you know any more, let me know. I'd love to hear about them. Now, each of these subsections has their own flavor to them. If you go to a tea house, then they'll ask you what kind of black tea you want. And when I first started out, didn't know what to tell them because honestly, I had no idea there was more than one flavor. So let me learn ya on some new black teas and what their different flavor profiles are. With Assam tea, it's generally a more bold kind of malty flavor. It's really heavy, and I mean, I love Assam tea. It's really good in the morning. It's got a pretty high caffeine profile. So if you're someone who is a little bit too jittery for coffee, but not jittery enough to go without anything, then maybe try an Assam tea in the morning. They pair really well with a nice kind of milk and honey or milk and sugar kind of situation, which is how I prefer to drink my tea. There's also Darjeeling tea, which is pretty often used for chai tea. So if you're a chai drinker like I am, especially in the fall and the winter months, that is probably where you're getting your chai flavors from a Darjeeling tea. A Ceylon tea is kind of a more spiced flavor. It comes from a small province in India, and India is known for a lot of their really delicious spices that we can use in a lot of our food. And with those spices growing in a similar areas, the tea kind of grabs that flavor and really holds on in those tea leaves. So even after the bruising and drying process, it still has some of that delicious spicy flavor in it. And Kenyan tea, it's very similar to an Assam tea. It's very full-bodied and heavy and also pairs well with milk and sugar, but it's a little bit less common than an Assam tea that you would find in a tea room or in the store or something like that. That's what we have for you guys today. I hope you guys liked it. Make sure to subscribe, give this a like, share it to all your tea-loving friends. And if you want some behind-the-scenes footage, some information on when we're gonna post and what we're gonna post, make sure to give us a follow on Instagram at thebig.sip and on Facebook at Hey Teacups. Share the page with your friends, and I'll see you guys next time. Happy sipping. That's black tea, baby. We did it. Next.